When you think about your food, you think about nutrients, ingredients, maybe calories. But what if I told you there's something else in there? Something spreading across the entire globe, but it's pretty much invisible. We're talking about microplastics. So today we're going to dig into how these tiny particles get made, where they're hiding, and what science actually knows about their journey into us.
To really get what's going on, you have to start with the scale of the problem. Check out this number, 6,300 million tons. That's how much plastic waste humans created in just 65 years, from 1950 to 2015. It's a number so huge, it's honestly hard to even wrap your head around. And it's the starting point for every single tiny particle we're about to talk about.
So where does it all go? You'd think, right, that recycling would handle a big chunk of it. But the reality is, well, it's kind of shocking. Despite all our efforts, only about 9% of all plastic ever made has been recycled. A whopping 79% has just been tossed into landfills or is just out there loose in the environment. And that's where it starts its long, slow process of breaking down into something much, much smaller.
Here's the game plan for today. First, we'll look at the age of plastic. Then, we'll see how that plastic turns into microplastic. After that, we'll uncover its creepy side as a toxic hitchhiker. Then we'll follow it into our food supply. And finally, we'll ask the big one. What does this all mean for our health?
All right, let's jump in. Section 1, the age of plastic. We're going to look at how this stuff, which really was a miracle material, so quickly turned into a massive global challenge.
The growth has been, to put it mildly, explosive. I mean, look at this. In 1950, the whole world produced about 2 million tons of plastic a year. Fast forward to 2015, and that number is 380 million tons, just in 1 year. That's more plastic produced in 2015 alone than in the entire 40-plus years between 1950 and the mid-90s. An explosion in production led, not surprisingly, to an explosion in waste.
So what happens to that mountain of plastic bags and bottles just sitting out there in the environment? Well, it doesn't just vanish. It transforms. And that brings us right to our second section, from plastic to microplastic.
Okay, so what is a microplastic, technically? Well, scientists officially defined it back in 2009. It's any piece of plastic smaller than 5 millimeters. For perspective, that's about the size of a sesame seed. But, and this is a big but, they are often way, way smaller. We're talking microscopic.
And they're not all born the same way. You can really put them into two main camps. On one hand, you have primary microplastics. These are the ones made to be small from the get-go. Think of those little microbeads that used to be in face scrubs. But the vast majority are secondary microplastics. These are what happens when bigger things, plastic bags, bottles, old fishing nets, get battered by sun, wind, and waves for years and just crumble into tiny little pieces.
And this is where the story takes a really critical and kind of dark turn. Let's talk about the toxic hitchhiker. Because it turns out these little plastic bits aren't just floating around doing nothing. Oh no, they basically become tiny magnets for all sorts of other nasty stuff.
Just let this quote sink in for a second. These tiny plastic fragments act like little chemical sponges. They can soak up pollutants from the water around them, concentrating them on their surface at levels that are 100 to 1,000,000 times higher than in the water itself. It's just staggering.
So what kind of hitchhikers are we talking about here? Well, the list is not great. We're talking about old industrial chemicals like PCBs that were banned ages ago but are still out there. We're talking toxic heavy metals like lead and cadmium. Even things like antibiotics and dangerous bacteria like Vibrio and E. coli, which can actually live on the plastic surface.
How does this even happen? Well, the fancy science term is adsorption. But you can just think of it like this. A lot of chemical pollutants actually hate water. They're looking for something else to stick to, and a plastic particle surface is just perfect for that. It acts like a tiny magnet, pulling those contaminants out of the water and holding on tight. And just like that, you've got a little toxic package.
Okay, so this is where it really hits home. Section 4, contamination of our food. Let's follow the trail of these little toxic hitchhikers right from the ocean
to our divot plates.
The evidence for this is just piling up, and it's popping up all over the world, in places you wouldn't even think. A study in China found almost 700 plastic particles in a single kilogram of sea salt. Another one in Germany found them in bottled water. They've even been found in canned sardines from Iran. It's not just one thing. It's in our salt, our water, and our seafood.
And if you happen to eat a lot of seafood, the numbers get pretty wild. Take a look at this. 11,000. That's the estimated number of microplastic particles that an average European who loves shellfish, things like mussels and oysters, could be eating every single year. And because we eat those animals whole, we're eating the plastic they filtered from the sea, too.
Which of course leads us to the biggest question of all in our final section. Is this actually a risk to our health? Let's break down what the science can tell us right now and what it can't.
This is it. This is the multi-million-dollar question that researchers all over the world are scrambling to answer. We know we're eating them, we know we're drinking them, but what in the world happens once they actually get inside of us?
Here's what we have so far. Most of the bigger particles probably just pass right through our system, but the real concern is the tiniest ones, particles smaller than 1.5 micrometers, which scientists suspect can actually get through our gut and into our organs. There's concern they could trigger inflammation or cellular stress. And then, in 2021, came the bombshell. For the first time ever, scientists found microplastics lodged in human placentas.
But, and this is so important, we have to be clear about what we don't know. This science is really, really new. The research itself states that the long-term health effects are, quote, relatively unknown. Some studies even suggest that the chemical risk from the plastic we eat might be pretty small compared to other ways we're exposed to chemicals every day. And a huge challenge is that scientists don't have a single standard way to do this research, so it's hard to compare results. But the one thing every single scientist agrees on, we urgently need more research.
So here's where we're at. We're left with a reality that is very clear and a future that is very, very uncertain. Microplastics are, without a doubt, a fundamental part of our world now. They are in the water we drink, they are in the food we eat, and now we know they're inside our bodies. In a way, we're all part of a global experiment none of us signed up for, and figuring out what happens next is one of the biggest challenges we face.